This is really an historic opportunity. The economic and social advancement of blacks in this country is still a great unfinished task. The methods and approaches for dealing with this task have become familiar over the past few years, and they demand re-examination for at least two reasons. First is the effectiveness of these approaches has been ever more seriously questioned in recent years. There's growing factual evidence of counterproductive results from noble intentions. Some of that factual evidence will be presented here tomorrow. In addition, numerous political trends in recent years indicate declining voter and taxpayer support for these approaches to which some of the older and more conventional black spokesmen, in quotes, remain committed. The events of November 4th were only the most dramatic example of this. They were not the only example. What are some of the pluses and minuses of our present situation? On the plus side, a dramatic economic rise of blacks during the 1960s, but which is slowed, in some cases stopped, in the 1970s. Many social problems are worsening. Continued disintegration of families, rising numbers of broken homes, 1/3 of all black homes now. A skyrocketing unemployment rate among black youths, 5 times as high in the late 1970s as in the late 1940s. Runaway crime rates, of which blacks are the chief victims. There are more blacks murdered every year than whites in absolute numbers. There's also a threat of a permanent underclass whose problems seem immune to prosperity, to equal opportunity, or to the advancement experienced by other blacks. We can see on the horizon the rise of racist groups such as the Nazis, the KKK, not only among the benighted, ignorant, but in places where you would never expect such groups, where they never had a foothold before. We can at least ask whether or to what extent the policies of our times have contributed to these problems of our time. Looking ahead to the future, one of the things that we need to focus on are facts about results, not rhetoric about intentions. We need to look not at the noble preambles of legislation, but at the incentives created in that legislation. Very often legislation intended to help the disadvantaged, in fact, pay people to stay disadvantaged, penalize them to the extent that they make an effort to rise from disadvantage. One of the problems in dealing with the politics of poverty and the programs for the disadvantaged in general, and blacks in particular, is that vast empires can be built on these programs. That these programs definitely prevent poverty among bureaucrats, economists, statisticians, and many others. I think that what this betrays is a sense, a sort of proprietary conception of blacks, somewhat at variance with the spirit of the 13th Amendment. I think that if insofar as we're going to enlist the intelligence, the desires, and the commitments of blacks themselves, we have to do so by offering more choice in more areas, to let them decide what is best for themselves and not to turn that job over to academics and government officials. Thank you.
Well, folks, just another absolute brilliant mind giving his speech here. And I found this clip on YouTube, and I wasn't a date, and I was trying to find some date. It looks like it's probably late 70s, early 80s, I'm assuming. If somebody could put in the comment section if they see this, if they could give me an idea, that'd be great. But Thomas Sowell, one of the absolute great economists of America, and the only reason that he's not known even more prominently within the country and within the students that go to school, his readings, his books, his articles should be absolute critical reading, along with Milton Friedman, and I could list so many others, but at least those two Every student should know about this. And it is amazing to find when you see all these other videos out there and you see news clips of students being interviewed at their campuses. And people ask, did you ever hear of Thomas Sowell? And if you ask this of black students, they're like, no, I never heard of him because he's conservative, because obviously he's not liberal, he's not leftist, he's not part of the progressives, he's not part of the liberal leftist, movement. He's apart from that. His diversity of thought, diversity of opinion doesn't fit with the liberals and the Democrats and the leftists, obviously. Now, there were some things that he pointed out, and he was right on so many aspects that he was talking about. I took some notes. He talked about the skyrocketing employment among black youths. This would have been probably in the 60s and late 60s and 70s, and compared that to the unemployment rates that were much lower in the 1940s. And this is when Jim Crow was still in effect, folks. And I know he's written about this, and people basically say, oh, so you think that if Jim Crow just stood and it was still racism in America, and we were still racist, and we didn't allow anybody mixing, and we didn't have any of these laws that elevated black people out of poverty, that would have been better to go back to those things. Nobody is saying that, but that's sort of the argument that you'll get from the other people. Oh, so you're saying racism was good? No, racism is bad and it always is bad. He was just citing statistics with different economic times, but there was so much more employment within the black population of where they were at. That's one thing, okay, that needs to be studied. Why was there more unemployment during those times than when everything sort of became integrated in the United States of America? But there were a lot of things obviously that was happening. The war, late 60s, early 70s, with everything going on, the war still, happening, the whole Nixon era, all that stuff happening. Then you're talking about the black murder rate. That's skyrocketed to even greater heights than it was, back then. Talking about blacks are being murdered in terms of numbers and proportions greater than any other, population group in America. That you could say black on black crime he was talking about. That also has gotten to unbelievable, heights over here in terms of numbers. Chicago is like 2 to 3 murders a day. You're talking anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 people, majority blacks being killed in the city of Chicago, present day 2024. Then talking about how government policies are providing a pathway to the permanent underclass for blacks. In other words, are policies that are made by government to supplant, fathers in the home, and that government becomes a father for the black community. And they look to government for their money, for their handouts, for the, for their payments. And he was saying, although a lot of these programs all start out with just lofty ideals and the feeling good, right? Oh, it feels good to do this. And I think he was being quite understated when he was saying this, that they all have lofty goals, they all try to do the right thing. But more often than not, I'd say 99% of the time, these programs that come into place, they end up being a boondoggle. They end up being a place of a lot of waste, a lot of fraud. Yes, they obviously help some people, but they continue to provide that permanent underclass. And we're seeing that today. And this is back, we're talking almost 50 years ago. We're talking about this speech. Then he was talking about we need to have a future focus. And he was talking about laws that basically are determined by the individual instead of by these so-called black leaders that are out there that are not doing this for the black citizenry. They're doing it for themselves, to get themselves enriched, to get themselves more power, to get themselves more fame, more money, rather than really looking at it from the situation of what is it that blacks need? What programs can we do that would not that would not have a tremendous waste of fraud, that would not have a tremendous waste of just for lack of social services or whatever, but something that could empower Black people and others to lift themselves out of the poverty that they're in so they can gain a foothold in society and be able to sustain themselves with good, well-paying jobs and to pass that thing legacy on, education, all these things onto their children. That's what Thomas Sowell was talking about, that a need for everyone to rise out of poverty, whether it's Black, brown, or whoever may be in those circumstances. But he was primarily addressing this as a keynote address at a Black conference. Anyways, we hope you enjoyed this piece here with Thomas Sowell. You're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir, and if you haven't done so already, we'd love you to subscribe to the channel, like, share, and follow us. You all know what to do. Take a look at our other video links here and there. And I'll leave you with my final thought, which has always been, when you're right, you're right. And Thomas Sowell is so right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.